people would cluster, so like white people in Miami would have like a definite preference towards treatment 1, and then the supply side would be responding to that demand for treatment 1 in that area, versus people in Minneapolis like having a definite preference towards treatment 2, and then the supply side for treatment 2 is responding to demand in Minneapolis. I mean, I guess you can still sort of tell a story where like maybe the primary care physician would say, look, you know, for whatever reason, like we have lots of people who do treatment 1 in this area, and nobody who does treatment 2, so you're really better off going with treatment 1 here. So it's not that they're like literally being forced into treatment 1 against their own sort of wishes or something like that. But it does seem like basically what's happening is like the supply side is really determining what people choose. It also turns out, somewhat disturbingly, perhaps, that the overall supply of hospitals predicts the probability of actually dying in a hospital, much more so than the personal stated preference for dying at home versus dying in a hospital. So that really suggests that maybe it's sort of supply rather than demand that's driving these things. And the expenditure level in the last 6 months of life doesn't seem to have any relationship with life expectancy. So these high spending areas that are spending more intensively in the last few months of life don't seem to be, at least in terms of the correlation, there doesn't seem to be a higher life expectancy in those areas versus the lower spending areas. And so in general, I think there's not very much evidence that intense spending near the end of life does generate substantial benefits. Certainly, I mean, it's just, you can document as a fact that average expenditures in the last 6 months of life are very high, and it seems questionable why you would want to spend that much on sort of those very intensive interventions if people don't end up making it anyway. So one possibility is that you can't really predict who's going to make it and who's not going to make it. So like think about a case in which like people become very seriously ill, and the response whenever they become very seriously ill is you pour tons and tons of resources in sort of trying to keep them alive as long as possible. And furthermore, suppose that maybe 80% of the time they die anyway, but 20% of the time they end up making it and then living another decade or something like that, right? So if you just look at, well, how much do we end up spending during people's last 6 months of life, what you would find is that we end up spending a lot of money, right? Because like 80% of those people aren't making it, and you're spending a lot of money during those 6 months. And so just the documented fact, which is correct, will be that we do spend a lot of money during the last months of life. But the high expenditures could still be justified if they gave even, say, 20% of these individuals an extra 5 or 10 years of life, because you know the VSL is very high, so the value of a life year is also pretty high. And so you might still come out sort of on the positive side when you do the cost-benefit analysis there. And you wouldn't really, the problem is short of like having some sort of randomized trial, you wouldn't really be able to document that, in fact, these 20% of the people were actually pulling through, because most of the time, 80% of the time, people would be ending up dying anyway. However, in that case, you would at least hope that maybe the regions that are spending large amounts of money on the last 6 months of life would have longer life expectancies, and we don't really see that. So either the effects are too small to detect, or those that can benefit are getting treated anyway in the low expenditure areas.
Could it be all explained by like the fact that a lot of people in the last like few months of their life like you're using hospice care, which is not necessarily
Yeah, but so I think that's true. But I think in general, like hospice care is not that expensive. So because you're not like checking them into the hospital per se. Like in a nursing home or in a yeah. So I mean that definitely does get to be expensive. But I think when we're talking about like really intense end of life spending, it's more along the lines of like people being in hospitals on life support, which so as expensive as it is to be in a nursing home, it's like an order of magnitude more expensive to actually be in the hospital, like doctors trying to attend to you on a regular basis and so forth. Yeah. So one possibility for why there, or I guess one way in which there could not be a relationship between expenditure levels and life expectancy would be that if you could actually identify those 20% who are going to make it if you spent the money, and you spent the money in the low expenditure areas and then didn't spend the money in the high expenditure areas, you basically sort of get all of the benefits in low expenditure areas but not incur the extra costs in those areas. Okay, so in terms of thinking about whether the benefits of additional spending in particular new medical technology can justify the costs, there have been attempts to sort of try to capture this and quantify it. So there's a paper by Cutler and Richardson where they basically kind of do this like, honestly, it's almost like a back the envelope type calculation. But what they're looking at is whether or not the total increase in healthcare spending is commensurate with the total value of increased lifespan and quality of life during the last 20 years or something like that, or during a 20-year period. So what they do is they measure what they call the health capital stock at a given age. And what that is basically the expected quality adjusted life years remaining for a person of that age. So again, there's sort of like two dimensions here on which this health capital stock can improve. So one dimension is that people can just start living longer. So that means that like, you know, if life expectancy, say conditional on reaching age 50, life expectancy was like 75 in 1970, and then it was like 80 in 1990, then what that would say is you're getting like an additional 5 years of expected life out of people who reach it to 50 or make it to age 50. So that's one dimension in which you can increase the health capital stock basically by prolonging lives. Then the other dimension is you can improve the quality of life. And so sort of figuring out whether or not people are living longer is pretty trivial if you get all the mortality data, but figuring out sort of what their quality of life is much more difficult. So what they do, or the methodology that they use to compute these quality adjusted life years, which is what QALY stands for, is to essentially run a regression of people's self-reported health on various diseases. So what you want to think about here is that you're going to essentially run a regression. So you get data on, or you survey people about sort of what their overall health is, and maybe like, you know, whether or not they can achieve certain activities like being mobile around the house and so forth. And then using the answers you collected from people, you also survey them on like what diseases they report having, so like whether or not they have heart disease and whether or not they have cancer and diabetes and all sorts of other diseases. And then you run a regression of self-reported health on all of these disease indicators. So what that's going to do is basically diseases that end up having a very strong negative correlation with self-reported health, so diseases that basically substantially reduce people's perception of their health, are going to end up getting large coefficients in that regression, and diseases that basically have no impact on people's self-reported health are going to get very small coefficients. And so the weights, the quality of life weights, come from the coefficients in those regressions. So like what you want to think of here is that you have some sort of like base quality of life. So if you're completely disease-free, then we assume you have like the maximum quality of life. And then as you get additional diseases, we're going to essentially reduce what your measured quality of life is. But we need to figure out sort of like which diseases have more serious impacts on quality of life and which diseases have less serious impacts. And so in order to sort of assign weights to each of those diseases, we need to know what the relationship is between sort of perception of your quality of life and those diseases. And so those weights are coming from a linear regression where you regress people's self-reported health status on indicators for whether or not they have these various diseases. And it turns out that actually the disease weights themselves can and do change over time. So the 1990 weights are generally less negative than the 1970 weights. Okay, so there's sort of three things going on here. So the first thing is, so what they're doing here is they're computing the health capital stock in 1970 and comparing it to health capital stock in 1990 to see how much it's improved. And there's three ways that it can improve. So one is that lives are just getting longer. That's the easiest to measure. The second is that the prevalence of disease could go down, and so then the quality adjusted life year measure is going to go up even if life years are remaining constant. Basically, people are have higher quality lives since they have less disease. And then the third thing actually is that they're going to run these regressions both in 1970 and in 1990, and they're going to get different answers in those two years. And so the 1990 weights, so finding the 1990 weights are smaller or less negative than the 1970 weights. And so what that's telling you is that like having the same disease in 1990 is basically correlated with a smaller, or is related to a smaller decline in self-reported health than having that disease in 1970. So presumably what that means is that like treatments for that disease have actually improved, right? That basically like you could have that disease and live a better life in 1990 than you could in 1970. So that's the third way in which the health capital stock could be improving. And so they kind of like sum up all of these changes across these three different ways. And what they find is that the benefits of new medical technology could potentially justify the cost. So on the cost side, what they look at is the expected medical costs for infants and for somebody who's age 65. So they find that those costs increased by $19,000 for infants and $34,000 for people who are of age 65. This is going from 1970 to 1990. But the health capital stock increases by $95,000 for infants between those 1970 and 1990, and then $169,000 for people who are over age 75. So if you were to assume that all of that increase in health capital stock from 1970 to 1990, how do you measure the health capital stock? How do you measure? So those are the three ways, or this is like it's changing along the three dimensions that I just mentioned. Right. Oh, I see. Yeah. So they have so those three dimensions that I mentioned are basically giving you the increase in the quality adjusted life years, and then using studies from like these VSL type studies, they're going to assign a dollar value to one quality adjusted life year. So I think I forget what the exact number is, but it's probably somewhere in the realm of like $100,000 or so, at least in today's dollars it would be. So if you assume that all of the increase in the health capital stock that you're seeing is coming from basically additional medical spending and the new technology, then this would look like a great trade-off, right? Because you spent only either $20,000 or $34,000, and you got an increase in health capital that was either $95,000 or $170,000. So in that case, then the benefits would greatly outweigh the costs. But that seems unlikely. So it seems unlikely that the only reason that you're seeing this increase in health capital stock is due to additional medical spending and new medical technologies. So there are other factors that we know have a big impact on total health, such as the decline in smoking rates. They're going to be generating some of that increase. But despite that fact, the fact that the benefit cost ratio here that they're measuring under this assumption that all of the increases due to health capital stock, or all the increases due to medical spending, they get benefit cost ratios about 5 to 1 if they apply that assumption. So that suggests that the average return to medical spending during this period may have been positive, right? Because what that's saying is that like even if only 20% of the increase in the health capital stock is due to new technology and new medical spending, you're still going to break even on a cost benefit perspective. So it's not sort of like not a really high bar to achieve, but at the same time, it's important to emphasize or distinguish between the average return to healthcare spending and the marginal return to healthcare spending. So even if we believe that the average net return to healthcare spending is positive based on the results of that study, that doesn't imply that the marginal dollar of healthcare spending is efficient. And the reason again is because of this flat curve graph. So remember, if you have like a health measure here on the y-axis and the dollars of spending on the x-axis, then the marginal return to spending is given by the tangent line to that curve, which is going to be a pretty flat slope when you're out into a high spending region. And the average return, so the average return is going to be given by the straight line that connects the origin with the point at which you're at. So just because this average return to the new medical spending was high during that period doesn't necessarily mean that the marginal dollar that you're spending, like that last dollar that you're spending, necessarily has a high return. And so an example which we'll actually talk about in substantially more detail later in the week is heart disease treatment. So there's sort of 3 levels of treatments, and the first 2 levels are generally pretty cheap. So you can do things like prescribe aspirin or have treat people with beta blockers or something like that. Those aren't very expensive interventions, and they are actually quite effective. So just doing those things alone, which are relatively cheap, is going to increase your health capital stock. But the more expensive treatment, of course, involves cardiac surgery. So once you like open somebody up on the surgery table and you're going in there, that can be effective in some cases, but it's very expensive. So the marginal sort of return in terms of like the improvement in health per dollar that you're spending there is going to be much lower than the return that you're getting when you're just doing these cheap but effective interventions. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't want to do it, but it does mean that you have to think more carefully about whether or not it's worth doing. So the average return to all of these treatments combined could be positive, but the marginal return to cardiac surgery might be essentially 0. In some cases, it could even be negative if you're doing like unnecessary surgery that turns out not to have a benefit. And certainly all surgery always has risks. So if there's not some clear benefit, you really don't want to be doing it. Okay. So in terms of thinking about like sort of the overall effectiveness of healthcare spending, particularly compared to other countries, the U.S. probably has like the best care available, but the access is restricted to a limited group. Although that's changing somewhat now that they have the Healthcare Act that is increasing, or over time is certainly going to increase coverage rates. So there's basically like 4 forming groups that have access to healthcare. So first, the largest group is going to be those who are privately insured through their employers, which are people who face a range of plans. Many are going to have restricted access to particular treatments or doctors, depending on which plan they choose, and the less expensive plans will have more restricted access. But overall, you're probably going to have access to what would be considered good quality care pretty much anywhere. Seniors are the second group that are basically guaranteed access to care through Medicare, which provides pretty much universal coverage. I think it's about like 99% coverage or so once you get above the age 65 range. The third group is just going to be people who are sufficiently wealthy that they can pay for their care no matter what. Care. Oh, yeah, sorry. So okay, well let me explain that and then we'll end. So Medicare didn't used to have a prescription component. So this is kind of like when it was developed back in like the 1960s. It was basically just covering doctor's visits and hospital visits because drug prescriptions actually weren't very expensive or weren't like a large share of total spending, medical spending back then. over time, it became a sufficiently larger share, so then it became awkward that Medicare didn't actually cover prescription drugs. So back in 2005, ironically during the Bush administration, they passed what's called Medicare Part D, which then covered prescription drugs, but they made it really, really weird. So it was like they were covering your drugs up until like $2,500 of payments. Then they basically didn't cover anything between something like $2,500 and $5,000, so that's what they called the donut hole, where you had to pay out of pocket the full cost. And then they went back to full coverage at $5,000 and above. And it was just some weird thing to try to get in under certain budget constraints and so forth. But it caused these very like awkward sort of situations for people who were covered under that. That donut hole now is being phased out, so you don't have this very strange like no coverage area. But that's just what it was.